Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Technocratic Podcast. Today, our guest is Megan Koutros. Megan is a previous colleague of mine and leader in the area of customer success and client relationship management. She currently works in the asset management space. Prior to that, Megan has run client-facing teams across a number of different verticals, including health tech. In fact, that's where I met Megan when she was running customer success for a healthcare company I was involved with. And I was really impressed by her depth of knowledge, both on the domain and her broad understanding of customer relationship management. She is truly great at what she does. Welcome to the podcast, Megan. It's great to have you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bobby. It's very nice to be here, and thank you for that nice introduction.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining. So, as always, I'm going to turn it over first to my trusty sidekick, Mishka McCowan. He'll dig into some fun get to know you questions to get us warmed up. Take it away, Mishka.
Right on. So these are very easy. It's just this or that. Pick one. There is no right answer. It's just the one that you prefer. So we'll start out with a technical one. Is it called GIF or GIF?
Oh, putting me on the spot right off the bat. GIF.
Megan's too young for this question. I think it's GIF too. I never said GIF ever. What about you, Mishka?
GIF. I'm a GIF
Yeah.
guy.
All
All
right. There we
right.
go.
Unanimous decision.
Okay. Food. Sweet or savory?
I do love both, but I'm a savory girl at heart.
Yeah, it's got to be savory for me too.
Sweet. Got a monster sweet tooth. That's why I love Halloween. Drama or comedy?
I'd say comedy.
Comedy for sure.
Unanimous. Comedy.
Nice.
Sunset or sunrise?
Oh, I'm a huge fan of all things sun related, but I would say sunset.
Yeah, sunrise on my end, Mishka.
I'm going to go with sunset, just because it's a nice capper on the day that's really pretty.
Yeah.
Here is one. I was unsure about this one, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Three Stooges or Three Musketeers?
Uh, I'm going to say Three Musketeers.
Three Musketeers candy. You can see a theme in Mishka's questions.
Exactly.
I'll go with the Stooges just to be a contrarian. And in the season, in the spirit of the season, Dracula or Frankenstein?
Let's say Dracula.
Yeah, Dracula. Definitely.
I'm going to go with Frankenstein. I think he's just misunderstood.
Right.
That brings us to the end of this or that.
Thank
Wait,
you.
Mishka, do you dress up for Halloween and scare the kids?
No, I can do it without dressing up. I'm fine with scaring small children just as me. How
Nice.
about you?
I like it. No, I try to give like a little bit of Halloween at work and stuff, but that's the most anybody's gonna get out of me is like an hour at work. I can't do it at home. At
Mhm.
home, it's too much. What about you, Megan? Do you guys do big Halloween stuff?
It's funny, my husband and I try to get the kids to do like a family costume, and they're never into it. So we're kind of doing our own thing this year. The kids are being, what's my daughter? My daughter's a witch, and my son's
Nice.
Spider-Man. And then my husband and I are doing a couple
Yeah.
from a movie or something
Do
easy.
kids go trick or treating nowadays? Is that a
Yeah,
thing still?
they still
Hmm.
do. Our neighborhood isn't super, it's kind of a little spread out, so I don't think we're going to get a ton of kids here, but there are a few neighborhoods that get a lot of action. So they love it. I
Yeah,
mean, any
yeah.
excuse to be able to eat candy all night is
All right. Exactly. All right, let's get into it, Megan. We usually start with kind of how you got into your sort of career, and you've actually done a bunch of different things. You've been biz dev, you've done customer success. Around that sort of customer success sort of area, how did you first enter into that sort of area? How did you get involved in it? What led you to it? It's not something you typically kind of study in college and get come into customer success. So how did you get started?
Yeah, so you're right. I've kind of bounced all around throughout my career. Ultimately landing in the customer success, the relationship management aspect. But I started out right out of college. I was doing an internship for the company that I'm actually at now again. So Neem as an intern in the compliance department. It just happened to be like an opening they had,
Yeah,
and I got in there, and it was it was interesting because you really get to learn a lot about a company fast when you're in the compliance department. You're reading
Yeah.
all the policies and procedures, and helping with the audits. So I started as an intern, but then they extended a full-time job offer to me. So again, staying within the compliance department, and then maybe within like 6 months, under a year of being there, I had somebody approach me from the portfolio management client relationship team, just saying, you seem to work really well with people. You have a good personality. Is this something you'd be interested in? And I
Right.
said, sure, why not? So I
Hmm.
went to, I did study economics in college. So it actually seemed like a more of
Yeah.
a fit to kind of go that route, anyways. So I ended up working as a portfolio manager under like some senior level people, more of a
Hmm.
support junior role, but really just getting that, like, that's where my client relationship management really started. Um,
Yeah.
I was there for 8 years, I want to say,
Hmm.
about 8 or 9
Yeah,
years.
quite some time. Yeah.
Yes, it was a good amount of time, and I ended up having my first son, my first child, my son, in
Hmm.
2015, and just realized I wanted to take a break for a little bit. I loved my job, but it was a lot,
Yeah.
traveling, the hours are long.
Yeah.
It was a
Yep.
lot. So I decided to take what I thought was going to be a year off, and ended up taking
Hmm.
4 years off, and ended up
Okay.
having a second kid.
Yeah.
But then after about 4.5 years of being a stay-at-home mom, you love them. They're amazing. It's great. I'm glad I did it, but I was ready
Yeah.
to get back into
Get
the,
back into it.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
And in that first stint that you did at Neem, were you doing you were saying you were doing some customer facing work, right?
Yep. Yeah. So it was like the title they called it was a client strategist. So you were
Okay.
kind of working on their portfolio, but you were the client
Yeah.
facing relationship person for
Well,
each
yeah.
client. And that's where I realized I really liked that part of
Okay. That was one of the things I noticed about you when we were sort of colleagues was that you were really good with talking to customers. And I remember talking to somebody who was one of our mutual friends, and she was like, "You're one of the best with customers." And how does somebody go about developing those skills? In the world of product and engineering, it's sort of like you're either customer facing or not. 90% of people are not customer facing. And there's kind of this thing of either you have it or not. Either you have that skill of being able to interact with customers and manage them well, or you don't have that skill. Do you feel like you developed that skill, or did you kind of innately just have a knack for it?
I think it was more innate for me. I do think I kind
Hmm.
of that's just naturally how, even in just my relationships in general, I think it can be
Yeah.
learned, though. I think it can be taught.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is, and it's just a human nature, people just want to be heard and they want to feel
Mm.
understood. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of times what people do wrong is they want to immediately fix it. And they're trying to come up with a solution before they even know what the problem is. So
Mm.
I've always just been a big proponent of being quiet, hearing what they have to say.
Mm.
I've had calls where people are yelling. They're so angry. By the end of
Right.
the call, they get off and they're like, "Thank you so much. This was so great. You're so helpful." You just need to let
Yeah.
them get that out. And then you can step back and say, "Okay, I hear you.
Yeah.
I, let me look into this." You don't need to have an answer right away. And I think a lot of people in that
Yeah.
customer facing role feel anxious that you do. You need to have it. And
Right.
I think you just need to be a good listener and really take time to come up with a good solution.
That is a great advice, and you felt like the core skills of interacting with customers you sort of had almost out of the box. Was there anything that you had a gap in that you had to learn initially in the first few years?
Definitely. It's natural for me to be able to relate to people. It's
Mm.
not as natural for me to be able to speak to a big group or present to a group. I do get anxious around that. So
Yeah, well,
knowing that,
everybody does, I think.
I think it is. It's very
Yeah,
uncomfortable, right? You're just always
yeah,
afraid of what questions could come up. And so I
yeah,
think just reminding myself that, like, I don't have to have every answer. I don't need to know everything. I can just
yeah,
contribute what I'm knowledgeable about, come, prepared with what I'm supposed to.
yeah,
And worst case, you get back to people. But that was scary in the beginning to think of going
yeah,
into boardrooms with 10 executives and having them ask me questions I might not know. And
yeah.
it's a challenge,
That's
definitely.
interesting. It's like the boardroom is quite different from interacting with customers. and it's
Yep.
all different from public speaking. All those three things kind of come with their own, I don't know, stress or whatever.
Mhm.
I remember the first time I had to do anything customer facing, it was with a big education customer, a school district, and I was a sales engineer. This is like 20 years, you weren't even born yet, but it was like I had to sit there and there was somebody presenting and then I was supporting them. And I remember having that same feeling you were talking about, where I wanted to solve their problem right away. And they were all talking and I knew the solution to their problem. And I knew I had to just blurt it out. Luckily, I didn't just say it, because that whole period where we just listened to them like vent their issues, was really what got us to sale in the end, was just listening more than telling them the solution. The solution did happen in the end, but it was that like 1 hour of letting them tell us all their problems and stuff that was a key. And I just learned it by blind luck. You know, like,
Yeah.
to somebody like you, it's natural to listen. To somebody like me, it's natural to tell them what to do and think. So I've had to learn that for sure.
Yeah.
Did you have like mentors and stuff when you first got into your role?
I did. Yes, I did. So I was working under two people directly. One of them was a great mentor. We just really clicked really well. And he used to always, which I think is what worked well for me, he used to always say, he's going to give me enough rope to hang myself, and meaning that he trusts me, right? He's going to do
Yeah,
as much as far, let me go as far as I can, and then he'll
right.
come in and kind of help if he feels like I need it. And just knowing that someone's kind of like behind you
Yeah,
quietly, but
right.
not overstepping, like that makes such a big difference when you're starting out. And because you have some people who will kind of try to jump in or speak over you, and
Hmm.
then you lose that confidence really quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I felt like it was a good relationship. I was able to learn a lot from the just from the role itself, but also just in that client facing perspective, like how to be a good
Yeah.
listener and how to be a good
Yeah,
support.
yeah, yeah.
That was a huge part of how I became
Yeah.
supportive
Do you
internally.
find that like that initial kind of mentorship that you got, maybe it was formal, maybe it was informal, but do you find that like that you're now able to do that same kind of thing for folks that are now coming up underneath you, or do you take part in any mentorship kind of programs? Do you do any of that kind of thing, informally or formally?
Yeah, I would say at my last role, I had more of that mentorship. Like I had people under me, I was able to manage and work with, and
Yeah,
I definitely felt like that responsibility. So yeah, I like to be able to do that when I can. I also think
yeah,
it's good to just see what people's strengths are and kind of
yeah,
take from there. But yeah, I do. I love to
yeah,
be able
right.
to help any way I can without assuming I can help. Some people are teaching me things too,
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. How did you start getting into more leadership roles and start to run teams? What was that kind of journey, part of the journey for you?
so after I took the few years off with my kids, you're almost starting again, right? Because
Hmm.
4 year gap on your resume is kind of hard to explain. I got lucky in finding Priya, where it was more of a startup,
Right.
so it was a kind of natural fit. They were looking for a relationship management, account manager type role, but
Yeah.
I did kind of feel like I was starting over again. So working there for maybe a year, I would say, and I would just keep kind of like tapping my boss on the shoulder, like just a reminder, I'm happy to keep
Hmm.
growing here. Like, what else can I do? And she
Right.
kind of took me under her wing and really just
Yeah, that's
gave me
awesome.
exposure to other things while still doing my
Yeah.
job, not necessarily, excuse me, having
Hmm.
any sort of promotion available at the time, but just pulling me into meetings, having me listen in on calls so I could just keep learning and learning. So
Yeah.
that really helped. And then as the company expanded and as we grew, there were positions available. And I just kept, reminding her that this would be something I'd be
Hmm.
interested in. And it
Yeah.
just evolved into that. And it really
Yeah.
was a good.
Isn't it amazing how much you have to remind people that you're there and you can do this, and you have to really advocate for yourself a lot.
100%. And I think
Yeah.
as women, we tend to not want to do that. You think like, oh,
Mm.
somebody's going to notice me. I'm just going to do a good job and
Yeah.
they're going to notice. And that's not
Yeah.
the case. Everybody's
Right.
they're doing their own work, they're getting their own stuff done. And of course, they
Yeah.
notice what's happening around them. But to actually go out of your way and pull someone aside and say, would you like this opportunity? It's pretty rare. So you really do have
Yeah.
to speak up for
Yeah.
yourself
That's
and
true.
be your own proponent.
100%, 100%. If you're doing really well on something, you sort of tend to remain there almost because you're doing such a good job on it. Nobody wants to shake things up.
That's a good point.
But if you want to succeed or grow in your career, I should say, then yeah, you really have to. It's almost like Inception. You have to insert the idea into people's heads about what you're capable of.
It's funny you say that actually, because so I ended up doing the onboarding implementation side of things, and it
Yeah.
wasn't until I actually asked to take on the technology team at Priya that they gave me that assignment. It just happened to be the
Wow.
person who was in that role didn't work out, they left, and I said, I'm working so closely with this team. Let me do it. Let me try. Let me
That's
just take
awesome.
it on.
I didn't
And
know that.
yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah. And you were great at it. I was
And it worked
shocked.
out
I was
great.
like,
Yeah, I learned a
you
lot.
seem like
I
you were a
liked it.
natural at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember thinking, oh man, she should get into product management over here. But I'm glad you're doing biz dev stuff now. Yeah. So that self advocacy was important for you. How was it when you first started managing people? When you had one, three, five, however big your team was initially, how was that experience? Did you naturally like managing, or was it like a difficult road?
I was a little nervous about it. I didn't know how people would take me coming in. And the good thing about being at a small organization is that you have opportunities like this, right? You
Yeah,
if you prove yourself and you speak up for yourself, you can be given opportunities to grow. The hard thing is everyone knows everyone. So it's just you're very, very interconnected. And
right,
they
right.
saw me as a peer for a really long time. And now all of a sudden they're reporting to me. So I
Hmm.
was worried of how that would go, and it was very seamless. It was great. There was a lot of respect, a lot of confidence in each other, and it worked out
Yeah,
well. But there was definitely nerves getting into it, not knowing how people
yeah,
will
yeah.
react. But yeah, I think it worked out well.
This is gonna sound like a slightly odd question, but how did you learn how to manage people? Just did you read some books? Did you look at YouTube videos? Did you just start doing it? Did you talk to somebody? How did you actually learn how to do it?
To be honest, I think it was a little bit of what to do and what not to do. And I
Hmm,
took it
okay.
from past experience. Just, for
Hmm.
example, we were talking about my first job, my mentor there. I remembered how I felt when he gave me that confidence and when he would be there to support me, and I tried to emulate that. And then there were things that I've
Yeah,
had other managers in the past that I knew did not work well for me, and I tried to stay away from that. I also think you can read as many books as you want, you can watch all these videos. It's
yeah,
so person dependent that
yeah.
you
It
really
really
have to get
is.
to know your team. You need to know
Yeah,
who it is you're managing, because one person may want this very, descript itinerary of what they need to do and
right.
details on their project.
Yeah,
And another person may want you to completely back off and
right.
just trust that they're going to get it done. And as long as they are, they're good. So I think that's a huge
Yeah,
part of it. It's just getting to
yeah,
know your team and then figuring out how they need to
yeah,
be managed.
yeah. It is such a personal thing, and yeah, I'm a big advocate for like managing people individually, and you got to have some team level stuff, but then
Mhm.
everybody's kind of unique. And so when you started kind of running this team or a group of different people, um, what was it that you sort of found was like the most effective way to sort of manage, and what were like some of the strategies that you used to manage?
So I would say I think what worked really well was staying, again, it's people dependent, but most of
Yeah,
the people on my team really appreciated that one-on-one connection. So having weekly check-ins, just kind of seeing where everything
yeah,
stands. I think communication, especially nowadays with everyone's not in an office anymore, right? We're all remote or we're hybrid, or
right.
some people are here
Yep.
and some people are there. You forget how easy it is to just like lose that communication. So I
Yeah.
think having check-ins as a whole team to really connect and just make sure everyone's on the same page, everyone knows what
Mm.
other people are working on, maybe bounce ideas off of each other. That
Hmm.
was super helpful when we were
Yeah.
working on the product and systems. Like it
Yeah.
kind of just picking each other's brain. But then also getting that one-on-one time where you're just really giving them that attention and
Mm,
that space to speak if there's something they want to talk about just privately.
yeah.
So that helped a lot. And I just think in general, just setting expectations, making
Mm,
sure they know what I'm expecting of them as a manager, and then from above, what leadership is expecting from us as a whole. I think that gets disconnected a lot when you're,
hmm.
with these bigger
Yep.
companies.
Can you run a good customer success team or biz dev team remotely where everybody's on Zoom? There is no headquarters, it's all spread out. I kind of go back and forth on it, but what's your take?
I I like the hybrid approach. I really do. I think if
Mm,
we've learned everything after COVID, it is that we need to have a better work-life balance. And I think that
mm,
came out as a
yeah,
positive. And, people realize that they have lives outside of work. But I do love the face-to-face interaction, especially when it's
yeah,
customer facing. I mean, it's so hard to get your point across via
yeah,
Zoom. Like people are half
yeah,
listening, they're distracted, they're looking around. I do see the appeal of being in person. Is it possible to do it fully remote? Of course. Everybody, if you have capable and willing people, you can. I
yeah,
personally do still like that
yeah,
interaction, the physical kind of relationships, and
yeah,
I think
yeah.
there's something to say for that.
I've come to feel the exact same way. The hybrid approach definitely seems like the ideal thing. There's a bunch of companies that are forcing folks to come in full time. I think that's going to partially backfire, but it's probably a strategy for them to sort of reduce the total headcount without doing like layoffs and stuff.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I think as far as like the efficacy or the performance of a team, I think hybrid probably is the best kind of model for it. One of the biggest reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast was because a lot of our audience are engineers who are rising through the ranks and they're becoming directors, they're becoming, senior leaders, maybe even VPs and sometimes CTOs. And I wanted to get like kind of your advice to them around like when they first get out of these deeply technical roles and start becoming more customer facing. Like, what are some tips for them to learn that in a faster kind of way? Because what I see, I've spent most of my life in product and tech, and most, I would say 80-90% are not customer facing. They don't have those skills. And so they're spent most of their careers in the world of deep like engineering. And then like 15 years into their career, suddenly they're thrust into a situation where they have to deal with like a huge customer or whatever. Now, the first time I had to deal with some kind of major customer facing thing as an engineer, I was like 24. So it's been some time for me where I learned how to do it. But a lot of people, they're maybe 40, 45, 50 before they're actually becoming customer facing. They've never done it before. Do you have some ideas or tips for them? Like, how can they become better at it instead of what normally happens, which is just like they just get thrown into it and they don't do a good job for like a year. And then after that, they maybe learn or they get out and they go back into like, architecture or something.
Yeah, I do think that is one of the challenges when I was managing the team at Priya, the product team and the systems team. It is hard to find somebody that can do both, like that's
Yeah.
comfortable speaking to a client, comfortable being client facing, and you don't want to make somebody do something they're not comfortable with either.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
I think you as a manager, as a director, as a leader, you need to identify who wants to do that, and they may not be good at it yet, but who's going in that direction, like they would like
Right.
to have that opportunity. And then from there, if it's not natural for them, I think just have them observe you. So sit in the room while you're doing the calls for a little
Yeah.
while. Have them
Right.
take on a little bit, like maybe just something. And I think for me personally, I know
Mm,
I speak well. I know I when I'm confident. So if I were helping somebody underneath me, I would say, "What do you feel most confident about in this
mm,
process that we're doing?" And maybe
yeah.
they're really good at demos because they have that clutch of the system there. Have them do a demo, have them do just
Hmm.
something where they already feel confident in themselves, but now you're giving them a
Yeah.
little bit of exposure. And that way, if a year from now you have to completely rely on them for an entire call or presentation,
Right.
they're a little more prepared. So I think it's really just
Yeah.
about getting comfortable with it and just
Yeah.
continuously being exposed to it, practicing. I know that sounds like such an easy answer, but
No, no, it's absolutely
how much
right.
that helps. Yeah.
Observing and practicing. I think you're spot on. One of the things I would do is I created this thing called customer success days where I would have all the engineering managers take like rotate through and take a day of sitting with customer
Mhm.
success because I two things. One is they would learn what the biggest problems were that
Yep.
customers had, instead of being like in their little, office over there and not knowing what was happening. And the second thing is just learning to interact with the customers. Like if a customer has if hundreds of customers have problems logging in, how do you talk to them about the problem? What do you say to them about when the fix is going to come through? What do you say to them about why it happened, explaining root cause, all that stuff. Customer success days work miraculously. And it was what you were saying, a little bit of observation, a little bit of practice, and it totally made the engineers have a completely different outlook on what was important and what was not. Because I felt like the customer success teams that I've worked with, there seemed to always be like a little bit of a dividing wall between customer success and product and engineering. And you never quite like got the perfect translation of what the customer was going through. But if you put some of the product people in with customer success, then it always seems to work better and they learn faster and, how to sort of be customer facing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a lot of times there is that divide because people the team that's already in product, they have this idea of what they want it to look like and what they think would work best and what the ideal state
Yeah.
should be. But it's really what the customer needs at the end of the day and what's going to
Yeah.
be most efficient for them. And if they just hear it coming from me or, whoever their manager is, it just sounds like
Right.
we're not listening to them or we're nagging,
Right.
and hearing
Right.
it
Right.
from the source, they then
Yeah.
understand why we're pushing for something other
Yes,
something else maybe.
yes,
So yeah, I agree. I
that's
think the
exactly
more
right.
you can integrate and the more you can kind of
Yeah,
cross pollinate and have everybody
yep,
see what each other does on a day-to-day basis, it can't hurt, that's for sure.
yeah, yeah. So I think it totally helps. You said this thing about nagging. That's a perfect word because being in the product side, it does create this product and customer support and success together. um, Sort of it creates an automatic dynamic almost by default of like there's there's this funnel effect of all these customer issues and complaints and all that type of stuff coming in. It hits customer support maybe, and then it goes through kind of some filtering, and then finally hits product. And um, usually product teams do think of it as almost like a nuisance that like they build this amazing product because they want to solve customer problems. As soon
Mhm.
as customers start using the problems, though, product and engineering is like, why are you bothering me about this? Like, just use what I made for you just quietly and don't bother me. How do companies break that kind of mentality? Because in the good companies, of course, product is always talking to customers,
Mhm.
talking to customer success, engineering is talking to customers and customer support. But in most companies that aren't good, there's a big silo. How do you break that culture, do you think?
I actually thought that's why it worked really well at Priya with me coming into
Mm,
that role. Because before me, it was somebody with a
yeah,
technology background. And I can see why
yeah,
you would get defensive and why because that's your baby, that's your team, they're working so
yeah,
hard. And so I actually felt like it was such a natural, organic way of working because they were able to see, like, my team trusted me. We got along really well.
yeah,
So they knew I wasn't just coming from this place of randomness or just no
hmm,
basis. Like, I really
yeah,
wanted them to understand that, like, we're just trying to make this the best product it can be, and they did. I feel like it worked really
yeah,
well because they had that
it did.
exposure to both sides. Like, they got to see the
Yeah,
customer experience side, but they also understood how it was impacted. I also think just being appreciative of what they're doing, and just
yeah,
saying, like, I know you worked really hard on this and this was such a big project for us, but as we work through it, I actually think we need to make some modifications.
yeah,
Just being open to it. And I think it comes down to every teammate, of course, but I think just
yeah,
having
that's
open
true.
communication and
What I found working with product teams was that if they have that kind of culture where they kind of think of the customer as a nuisance. You almost have to like create a structure that forces that to go away. So you have to talk about having customer input go into the roadmap in the appropriate way. You have to have a certain amount of customer touch points that the product team has to do. Maybe it's through customer success, but maybe it's just even standalone, directly with working directly with the customers. And you have to have some sort of, I think, framework in the world of product where customer input is factored in the product strategy in the appropriate way. You have to have all these things, sometimes to kind of break the logjam of just product thinking that customers aren't important for some reason, which, like I said, it's a very weird phenomenon that happens where, especially like in the early days, this didn't happen in Priya at all, but in the early days of some companies, you're in love with the customers because you're trying to do customer acquisition. And then once you have them, you almost become complacent. But I always think the customer facing teams are some of the most important teams in the company. They're kind of like ears to the ground, knowing what's happening day in, day out.
Hmm.
And I think there should be better channels of communication between customer success and product. Now, when you were kind of doing both, that was perfect because you could run both sides. But when there's somebody like you who's leading customer success, and then there's also a VP of product, how do you guys build the right relationship so that conduit of information flow can happen in like the right way?
I think it's just if you're not the same person, then I think you have to just work together really closely. I think you just keep
Hmm.
communicating with each other. I think too is just understanding why you need what you're asking for is
Yeah.
such a big help too,
Yeah.
because then it just makes it a bigger picture instead of just being like, do this and we want it changed. Understanding, well,
Right.
we want it ultimately to work like this. Have them be part of the
Yeah.
solution with you. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
also, like really, it's like
Exactly.
inspiring. I loved that. I loved being able to look at something and saying, this is working okay, but I feel like we can make it a little bit better. And then pulling someone from product team in and say, how do we do
Yeah.
that? Like, this is my
Yeah.
idea. How do we do
Right.
it? That gives them like an ownership, like a stake in this project. And I
Yeah.
think it definitely makes that process a little bit easier. But yeah, I think you just have to really, really work well together. Like if it's something where, at Priya, we had the onboarding calls.
Hmm.
So I would do half of the call where I'm going over more of the operational um, part of the
Yeah.
process. And you'd have somebody from product on the call with me, and they
Right.
would go through their part and they would say, this is what we're doing. This is what we have to do. Ask
Hmm.
questions that maybe I wouldn't think to ask. Just having
Hmm.
that participation and that teamwork, I
Yeah.
think helps a lot.
That's a pretty key relationship, the head of customer success and the head of product, and
Mhm.
the head of customer support and the head of product. That those are pretty important relationships. Um, I just love the fact that you can handle customers so well. So I've got another question about that. If we go back
Yeah,
to
of
that in a
course.
second. I remember being in a scenario where at a previous firm where we had acquired a company that had a huge ed tech customer. It was like 30 million ARR or something like that. So huge for that company. And I remember like getting on the call with this customer, and for the first like 10 or 15 minutes, they were just yelling at us because the team hadn't done something they were supposed to deliver on or whatever. And after the conversation was over, I decided to just have a one-on-one with the customer myself. And I asked them, what led you up to this like heightened level of being so upset? And they said, a lot of it was because they had missed multiple delivery deadlines. And this wasn't the first time. So trust was greatly eroded.
Mhm.
So, I assured them that, look, we have a new team here and we have a new way of delivering the software. And we ended up delivering everything on time after that, and everything was good. But when trust has been eroded with customers, how do you sort of get it back? Obviously, it's not an overnight thing, but what do you have to do to recreate the connection of delivering value to the customer and recreating the trust again?
That's really, really hard. I mean, that it is. And even if it happened to us, we would be the same, right? I always try to put myself in the person's position and
Yeah.
you understand where they're coming from. If there are I always try to make sure that their complaints are valid first, because a lot of times it's misunderstandings. It's,
Hmm.
deliverables. They expected to be done in 2 days, and actually we said it would be a week. And you just kind of go back and
Right.
make sure you're both on the same page as far as expectations. But if it turns out that they are right, and we've, done things a few times now where we just haven't been able to meet that standard or that expectation, the only thing you can do is be better, do better consistently. Just show them
Hmm.
you're very important to us. We're going to get this right. And
Right.
you have to take more ownership in that. Like, whoever the leader of that is, you need to be in more contact with them. You need to be on the team,
Right.
making sure that these specific things are getting done. Maybe put in more, some type of management in place, and not even from a people perspective, but are there ways that we can automate this? Is there a reason that we're
Right.
making the same mistake? Maybe we need to figure out a better way of doing it. So yeah, I think you just really have to kind of dig your heels in and make sure you're doing the work that you're supposed to be doing, and show
Yeah.
them that consistently.
Yeah. Exactly. It felt like with that example, it was um, build a plan with clear milestones, deliver on all those milestones consistently, communicate with them much more than before. And
Yep.
once you start stacking the trust points, it sort of you're able to bring it back or whatever.
Yep.
Um, you've obviously managed so many people in your career, um, in the client facing side and on the biz dev side. On the client facing side, sort of what are the attributes you look for when you're hiring somebody for a support team or for a success team? Are there some common traits that you think are really important for the roles that are client facing?
I think it's really just, for me personally, it's really a lot about like a feeling you get about a person. Like, are they
Hmm.
really willing to do the work? Are they able to be like open and honest with feed? Because a lot of it is, you're going to get a lot of negative feedback. You might hear things that might be tough to hear, and are they open to that? Are they going to be okay
Yeah.
with it? Are they not defensive? And that's hard to know in, a hour long interview. But I think you just
Right.
kind of get a feeling about somebody, like, are they going to be able to kind of be successful in this role, in a sense that they can handle these relationships, but they can also handle,
Mm.
that's the hardest part, is when you're getting that phone call and somebody's yelling at you. So just
Yeah.
knowing that they're open to hearing things and willing to just listen, and people who like come up with creative ideas, and even if they don't all work, I think that's just, it's like inspiring to be around people like that. So I think it's
Hmm.
a part of
Yeah.
just being successful, is listening and thinking about ways that you can kind of
Yeah.
do things
So
better.
you make more of a gut instinct decision. Is that
Yeah, I
right?
think
Yeah.
so. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. I am the complete opposite. I'm just like, I've got all these metrics. I'm looking at. I'm like, okay, you don't fit this. Yes, you fit that. But the
And how
gut
does that work
instinct
out, though? Can
thing,
I ask you? Do you think it works well, like having that very structured approach?
you know, yeah, I kind of think it does. As I've gotten kind of maybe older, also in my career, I feel like I don't have time to, I don't know, test out if somebody's going to work as much as I did before.
Yep.
I sort of know exactly what I'm looking for. I have a list of criteria. Either they meet it or they don't. And I've just found that's works for me,
Yep.
but I think that, you have to have probably a combination of both, like you have to have good instinct and you have to have some sense of like, what are your basic criteria and that kind of thing. And if you do have both, then you can hire really well. What I find in technology people that I really love that succeed in sort of being good with clients is pretty much patience,
Yep.
and if they're it's funny, but I think a lot of engineers are actually quite impatient. They're used to working with technology, and they are constantly trying to fix it, and that fix it mentality is exactly wrong in a lot of situations with customers. So the technologists that have a lot of patience, that maybe they came before they became technologists, they came from different backgrounds where patience was required. They seem to do really well. Like they can sit there, they can deal with a customer getting upset for a while, then understand, once they understand the problems, then they can propose a solution in a calm and, kind of like de-escalating kind of way. I think that's probably a skill that kind of number one or two, for me when I'm thinking about, okay, well, we need somebody who's, kind of client facing. The other thing that I find for product people who are getting into more client facing roles, which I think tends to happen as you go higher, and the other thing to look for is, like, in my experience, is when you actually sort of like work directly with clients day in and day out, like you do, you sort of develop a set of competency triggers, let's call them. You know, the things that if you say these things, they're going to work. And if you say these 10 other things, it's not going to work. Like telling a customer they're wrong, it's never going to work. And so I like the sort of product leaders and technology leaders that have their set of competency triggers that are going to work for them. And you can just tell when you see them interact, they use the same good, solid responses each and every time. It kind of goes to this idea, you can almost turn it into a little bit of a science. There's certainly a lot of the instinct that goes into it, which I think people like you kind of innately have. But then for folks that are more like me, who are coming from an engineering background, we have to almost treat it like a science to get that same or nearly the same level of efficacy that you just naturally have. So I like the product leaders that kind of work on that end of things and have this library of competency triggers that they can use.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we were saying earlier too. I think it can be learned. I think it is more innate and more natural for some people, but I do think it can be learned from experience and observation and
Yeah,
just constant practice.
yeah, exactly. So you're at a certain point now in your career where you've done several different things. Um, what is it that sort of drew you more to business development, maybe, than customer success? Was it just, you wanted to try something new, or you had done it before? What kind of got you into this new kind of role?
So it was really just by luck. I loved what I was doing before. I really was enjoying my role there. Loved being, part of the team and running the customer success and client delivery. I really liked all of that. I happened
Yeah.
to just bump into somebody who I used to work with at my original company that I started with, 15 years ago,
Yeah.
20. I won't age myself, so I'll leave that out. Um, and I left there originally, obviously, to be a stay-at-home mom, but I knew, like, I loved the company. Everybody I worked with was
Yeah.
like family. So there was always a part of me that was curious, like if I would
Uh,
ever ultimately return. So I ended up bumping into somebody, and that just person who I used to work with was running the business development team, and it was kind of,
okay.
it was a new opportunity, and it was scary to, at this late in my career to kind of start fresh. But the funny thing is, it's funny how much applies. Like your skill set
Mm.
really can apply in so many different roles. And I think if I've learned anything from this is to just take a chance, and just see. And worst case, I think I have some good connections and good relationships
Yeah.
with people. If this didn't work out, I could, kind of go back to my customer success or something in that more arena. But I think it's just worth it to kind of take a chance on yourself and try something new. I knew the organization, so that felt safe, but
Yeah.
the role was new, but exciting to try something new.
Are there skills that transferred? You found customer success skills transferred over to business development.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it all comes down to your relationship with people at the end of the day. Whether it's they already trust you because they've chosen the company and your organization, and now you're just working and making sure that the relationship is successful and managing that
Hmm.
relationship. And now it's just a little earlier in the game. I'm coming in and getting them to trust the organization, but it's still that relationship
Yeah.
and that trust and just getting, making them feel heard. Like, what do you need? How can we help you? But just a little bit earlier in the process. So yeah, I think there's a lot of skill sets that transfer. Um, and I think a lot of it too, when we were talking earlier about before we jumped on here, but about like how technology can be brought into all of this. I also think you can just use technology to your advantage right now. And if you're not
Mm,
familiar with something, if you're starting something new, you have so much available to you, so many resources. So even
totally.
if you feel like you're, a newcomer to something, a quick
Hmm.
Google search or a chat GPT will, help you
Hmm.
kind of get right up to speed. So I think it's definitely transferable skills, but also you just kind of keep learning and using technology to your advantage to just keep
Yeah.
challenging yourself.
Should customer success leaders use ChatGPT in their repertoire of tools? Do you
I don't
recommend
think,
that?
yeah, I don't think it ever hurts to have it. I
Yeah.
don't think you should be relying on it 100%. I mean, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's really just as you useful as the person who's using it, right? You still have to be
Mm,
putting in the right questions. You have to be putting in the right information to get those specific answers that are going to be right for you and your organization. Yeah, I don't think it ever hurts to kind of see where you can use
yeah.
technology.
Well, there's all these startups that are around now that are using AI to do quote unquote customer success or support. Obviously, there's so much application for AI to automate so much of customer success or support. Um, do you believe that's the right direction that this industry, customer success, should go or support should go in, go towards? Do you feel like AI has a big role to play, or are you on the other side? And maybe you feel like, you know what, if you're talking to a customer, it has to be a human talking to the customer. It can't be AI or a machine or a robot or something. Which end of the spectrum do you feel more closely tied to?
Definitely more tied to the human interaction and that connection. And I
Yeah,
even, even when like we're calling customer support, and sometimes I can't tell if I'm talking to an actual human or
yeah,
it's, a bot on the other end. Like the way they ask the questions, you're like, is this a human or is it? And you don't want
right.
people to leave a situation or an experience with you confused. So I
Yeah,
think human interaction 100%. I think where AI and technology can come in is behind the scenes, like help you get to that point, of just
mm,
making your internal processes easier,
yeah,
just making it more efficient. I think that there's always a place for that, but I'm still a huge proponent of face-to-face interaction, the
yeah.
client being able to speak to someone.
I remember when United, I think it was, spent, this is like 10 years ago now, they spent a tremendous amount of money on building, like, literally at that time the world's greatest, like, customer support line for managing their flights and all that. And I remember calling it up one day and thinking, this is, I mean, it was so obvious it was a robot, but or whatever, not AI, but at that time just like a voice thing, artificial voice thing. But I still felt like this was faster than a person. This is more accurate. And being a technologist, from 10 years to now, stuff's advanced a lot. And I think it's just going to keep advancing to the point where it's going to be indistinguishable from a human. And I don't know if I think of it as like, is that right or wrong? I just think of it as like, that's a fact of life that's going to happen. Um, do you think at that point that when a customer can't really tell if it's a robot or an AI or a human, that at that point, right, customer success or support changes quite a lot? And um, so the number one, do you think that's going to happen in our lifetime in the next 2, 3 years or 5 years? And if it does, what happens to customer support and success as a function in a company, in your opinion? Does it just disappear, or what? How do you think that transforms?
I do think it's inevitable, right? Like I think we're headed in that direction, and things are getting more efficient and getting more lifelike and realistic. So yeah, I do think it's something we'll just continue to see grow and become more apparent.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know if it will. I think you still always have to have some oversight. It definitely, for certain situations, it does make it a lot easier for the user experience too. To your point, calling, or I even see it on like WhatsApp now. You can like text
mm.
the JetBlue or United,
Oh,
and that
cool.
is
Mhm.
it is helpful to just be able to have a really quick like, why was my flight canceled, or can you reschedule, like
Yeah,
things where it's just you need an answer and you need it as fast as possible. Absolutely.
Right.
I think where that interaction, the human interaction, I mean, you still need somebody going through and making sure that you're auditing what you're doing and what the output
Right.
is, making sure that people are satisfied with the results they're getting. There still
Yeah.
has to always kind of be a
We're not
human.
there yet. We're not
Right.
fully there yet, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting though. We live in such an interesting time with Gen AI and how much of an impact that's starting to have. I always say this that like the innovation part of it, where all these new technologies are happening underneath the umbrella of AI, is going like super fast, but I don't think companies are adopting it that fast. I think for most companies, it's like a whole long process of technology adoption that's going to possibly take years. But I think it's going to get interesting when there's a competitor out there of your company that's doing, can handle 10 times as many inbound customer calls at like with like a tenth of the people. Then it's going to start getting kind of crazy, and I think companies will start adopting more. But it's a very interesting and scary time at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. And I think everybody at each like big generational, gap of this, something new in technology coming, I think everybody kind of feels like that each time. And then you
Yeah,
you do evolve and you adapt to it. I
yeah,
think that's a good point, though. If you're already an established organization, it is hard to start incorporating all of like you go to these conferences, you go to Dreamforce, or we have HubSpot
yeah.
at the company I'm with now. So you go to their inbound conference and you see all the ways that you can use the technology, and you're inspired, and this is great. But to
Hmm.
actually implement it into your organization is a lot of work, and a lot of people
Yeah,
can't do
a
that
lot of change
quickly.
management.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any kind of there's frameworks for change management, of course, but every company seems so unique. And have you noticed if there's any kind of tips or ideas or things that you've seen work that like you have a whole customer support team, for example, you're bringing in this brand new technology. How do you roll it out, but not just roll it out, but like actually get them to adopt it, engage with the technology, use it, like it, leverage it in the right way? Do you have any thoughts on that, on how to best do that?
Yeah, that's challenging. That's really, really difficult. People are so set in their ways. It's just a human
Yeah,
nature that when you know how to do something, even if it makes your life easier, it is just easier to do it the old way, right? So
right.
we have something similar. Like right now, we're working on trying to come up with a better way of implementing and onboarding our new clients at Neem, and we've put in like a planner type tool in place, and it's difficult to get people to actually, they used to just send an email, or and
Hmm.
now to have to go into this application and check a box for their task being completed,
Yeah.
or however it works. It's just one extra step, but I think you can only do that by being the model and doing it, and then just consistently
Mm.
reminding people, just being that model for them so they can see it, they start
Yeah.
to get used to it, and it just becomes second nature. But it can be
Right.
challenging and it can take a while. I think it
Yeah.
has to come from leadership too, and I think they have to support it and really, encourage
Hmm.
the use of it too.
Yeah. I think a lot of it's got to be top down. I mean, all these
Hmm.
big consulting companies, they make so much money just doing essentially change management. Um, and that shows you how hard it is, in most companies. But it's interesting because like when as a technologist, when cloud became a thing, 90% of the people in the company didn't care. Cloud, not cloud, didn't couldn't care less. Today, still don't care. Um, but with AI, it's got such a consumer angle. We're using it right now on our phones, in effect, right? With like the new release of Android photo apps and Apple applications and stuff that now let you do all kinds of cool things using AI. We're seeing it in our day-to-day lives. Then we go to work and there's new HubSpot, the new version has AI in it. Okay, how do we get that? It's everywhere.
Hmm.
And I think that's probably going to accelerate the adoption of it more than maybe other technologies or whatever. But I think it remains to be seen because I think they said some similar things also about the internet. And believe it or not, it took years for some companies to get online back in the day. That was
Yeah.
a thing. Um, but uh, but yeah, I think customer success. is and customer support and sales slash biz dev are some of the areas where, at least from my sort of perception, are going to see some of the biggest sort of challenges with respect to AI adoption and stuff, because it's difficult to get AI to work right with respect to actual human beings on the other side, customers and partners and stuff. Whereas an AI can write some code, but is it going to be able to talk to the customer in the right way? It's definitely got some challenges there. Um, you obviously dealt with a lot of sort of technology challenges when you're running customer success teams. When you think about sort of like, how do you best advocate for customer support and success? Like, hey, this is the technology we need. This is why we need it. This is why it's going to work. I'm more like a business case guy, so I'm going to make a business case about that and like
Mhm.
run it up the chain or whatever. But how do you kind of approach it? If you need some tools or systems, maybe you want to change from HubSpot to Salesforce or vice versa. Like, how do you go about advocating for technology adoption in your own teams?
I think you just have to. I think using a business case is the perfect way of doing it. You just explain your reasoning, why you think, and not just a reason, but come up with an actual solution. Don't just complain about something or think,
Right.
something could be done better. Take the time, do the research, see what you actually need and what you actually want and think could work better. Get the right resources in place. Have those conversations. Like if it's somebody at Salesforce, like talk to them and say, this is what we're trying to do. They know it best. Talk to
Yeah.
your resources. Like just pull in all of that and make that case. I remember when we were working together, we were trying to figure out the MuleSoft application, and you
Mm.
were just saying it's really hard to prove ROI on this kind of stuff before you're doing it. But if you can break down and say like this will make the process, we're taking 20 minutes on each case and there's 50 cases a day, and it's having actual numbers and data and showing like how this is going to
Pretty
impact your
valuable. Yeah.
day is really, really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. No question about it. Well, Megan, I want to end on a few just sort of like career questions and topics, if you don't mind talking a little bit about sort of your big sort of takeaways from being in leadership positions and that sort of thing. For people who are trying to become better leaders, one question I always ask other executives is that what kind of risks did you have to take to rise up in the organization? You kind of mentioned where you were like putting your foot out there with your boss, you were advocating for this role that you think you could be good. That was a little bit of a risk, right? That
Mhm.
you had to kind of be like, I'm going to be good at this, and then actually deliver on it, which you totally did, by the way. But like, what other kinds of risks should people take in order to rise up? Because, like you said, I think whether it's men, women, whoever, if you're just quiet and you don't take any risks and you just kind of keep the status quo, you're probably not going to just magically get recognized and promoted and stuff, right? So, are there
Yeah.
any thoughts you can give our audience around like the type of risks that they should be willing to take?
Yeah, I think exactly what you said. I think you just need to be willing to take a risk of betting on yourself. And if you
Mm,
know it's something you want to do and you want to try and you just know that you would be able to be effective, just take that risk and throw your name in the hat and ask for extra responsibilities. The risk is you could take on a lot more and it becomes,
hmm
an overwhelming position or an overwhelming amount of work. But you are proving to yourself that you can do it, and I think that's a risk in itself, just like not letting yourself
Yeah,
down.
yeah,
But yeah, I think just
yeah,
speaking up, making relationships with other people in an organization and just getting to know leadership and really understanding what they want, and you
yep,
just and take a risk by throwing ideas out there. Like if you think something, just say it. Worst case you're wrong, worst case
hmm
they don't agree, at least
I
you're
think that's huge.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's huge, especially in like sort of lower mid-market companies are a little bit smaller,
Mhm.
where it's not so big that you can't be in a room. You can be in the room, but then if you're going to be in the room, my boss, she taught me this. If you're going to be in a room, then contribute, say something, and it can be the wrong thing, but you have to say what's on your mind, and otherwise, why are you there, kind of
Mhm.
thing.
There's been times where I've been in a room and I've kept my mouth shut because I was nervous. I didn't
Mm.
want to speak up. I didn't feel like I was the right person to be speaking. And then
Oh
minutes
yeah.
later, somebody else says the
Oh my
exact same
God.
thing that's been playing in my head. And you're
Exactly.
like, I
And
should
you're
have
like,
said
damn.
it.
100%.
Exactly. Just take
100%.
the shot, take the risk, say what you're
Yeah.
thinking. And worst
Yeah.
case, wrong, and you learn from it, you know?
Yeah. I also find all the stuff you just said is absolutely spot on. I would just add that some of the best executives, when I interview them and talk to them, what they say is that they were willing to take on a project that nobody else was willing to take on.
Hmm.
And it goes back a little bit to that betting on yourself thing, but it's like there's a really hard project. It needs to get done. Nobody in the business is willing to do it. Somebody raises their hand, takes it on, gets it done. That can catapult you a long way in your career, you know?
Absolutely.
And obviously you've got to have the ability to do it, but like if you have that confidence, you should. I urge people, like, figure out a project in the company that the board and the executive team needs done, some goal that they have, some
Yep.
need that they have that's not getting done, and go dive into that and get it done. And whether you're super smart or not, or all those things just don't mean anything. You deliver the results, and people start to say, "Oh wow, oh my God, this person can do it," and people can really rise like that. Last question before we wrap up:
Okay.
when you look back at your career, can you think of some, or do you have any thought around what were the big inflection points that, like, really allowed you to go in this direction or that direction? Was it always just sort of like the relationship you had with your boss and advocating for yourself and doing something new? Or was it like you ran into somebody that was an inflection point? Was it more organic, or did you ever sit there and say, I got to make this happen, so I'm going to do this, like in order to kind of like go into new roles or rise in the organization?
I think it's a combination of both, 100%. You have to have great relationships for people to even consider you, to even, as much as we like to
Right.
think it's all about your your education and
Skills,
your
or yeah.
skills, and
Hmm.
that is huge and obviously helpful when you get the role, but it's also about who you know and who you have relationships with and how people feel about you. Do they trust you? Do they want you on your team? You could be really, really great at what you do, but people don't like working with you. So it's 100% both. You need to do that
Hmm.
relationships, again, internally. I don't even mean externally. Internally, having good working relationships with people, make sure people trust you, but then also doing a good job with it, and taking a chance on yourself, and pushing for yourself. So I think, there's definitely been a few points in my career that were more luck, you could say, somebody just asking, would you be interested in this kind of position? I could have been in compliance for the rest of my life if nobody asked. So, there's that luck, but then you
Yeah.
get in that role and you prove yourself and you work really hard. And then
Yeah.
I did that shift of going into being a stay-at-home mom. That could have also completely, I could have been a stay-at-home mom for the rest of my life here on out, and I just knew
Hmm.
that wasn't for me and I had to get back into it. So I was willing
Yeah.
to get in at a lower level so that I could once again work on relationships and work on proving myself. And
Yeah.
it took 4 or 5 years, but I was ultimately in a leadership position, and then came to a
Hmm.
new kind of pivot in my career, and things are going really well there too. So
Yeah.
it's
As
both.
you, that's awesome, Megan. As you start to go higher and higher, or continue to go higher and higher, do you anticipate the balance between taking care of your kids and family and all that and taking care of work? Is that going to get easier because the kids are going to get older, or is it get harder? Like, how do you think you'll balance
I don't know the next day if things are harder or easier. It's one day
that?
it's easy, one day it's hard. So you never
Yeah.
know what you're going to get. But I
Yeah.
think it's challenging in different ways. When they're little, they're
Yeah.
so dependent on you, and it's like an emotional and physical, like you are there 100% of their life.
Yeah.
Now my son's 9, my daughter's 6. They're
Hmm.
still hugely dependent on me, but also they have their downtime where they can do their own thing, and I can sit on the
Right.
couch get some work done and they're, in the other room. As
Yeah.
they get older, maybe it'll be even more of that. So it's just
Right.
always a balance that you have to take day by day and you figure out. And I think
Yeah.
it's a challenge, definitely, with if you're
Yeah.
trying to, if there's like travel involved with work and you have to leave the family and leave the kids, it gets hard, but it's
Yeah.
just about
Travel is
balance.
hard.
Yeah.
Big projects,
Hmm.
working 24/7. Sure. I don't know how you do it. It's I don't have kids, so it's always super impressive to anybody who has kids and is able to lead teams and take care of the family at the same time. So, all right. Well, I think we're at the end of our time. It was a pleasure talking with you today, Megan.
It was great to be here. Thank you guys. This was great.
All right. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. I'll see you next time on the Technocratic Podcast. In the meantime, keep the sharks swimming.